The debate last night was interesting and honestly more lively than I thought it'd be. The whole night, Bernie looked like he was fed up. He wasn't taking shit from anybody. He came out swinging and nobody was safe. John Delaney, Steve Bullock, John Hickenlooper, even the moderators got a piece of Bernie, and I loved it. Because this wasn't unprovoked aggression from Bernie. Everyone was trying to misrepresent Bernie's position or flat out lie about them to smear Bernie. Not to mention, these are the same hacky smears that people use against Bernie every day. So of course, he's going to get frustrated. Bernie has a minute to speak to make his case for what his policies are and why they'll work. And now on top of that, every time he opens his mouth, he has to waste some of that precious time he has to make his case correcting the record. Now this ends up being a good thing because Bernie just said, fuck it, let's do the damn thing. If the only options he has are to sit there and get steamrolled like a bitch or slap around everyone on that stage, he's going to slap around everyone on that stage because Bernie ain't nobody's bitch. Which brings me to this specific part of the debate. Tim Ryan thought since Tulsi Gabbard wasn't on stage to ruin his night, he was going to have carte blanche to act the fool. He comes for Bernie by pretending his opposition to Medicare for All is because he's looking out for union workers. Starts by talking about how union workers in Michigan fought for these wonderful health insurance plans, and these workers even took a pay cut so their employers could provide those health insurance plans. And then he finishes by saying, I'm not going to kick these union workers off their insurance with Medicare for All. Then Jake Tapper, being Jake Tapper, chimes in to co-sign, and he brings up the fact that there are 600,000 union workers in Michigan who have these insurance plans. And basically ask Bernie, can you promise that Medicare for All won't make them give up the benefits that they fought for? Bernie says yes, and before he can finish his answer, Tim Ryan interjects, screaming about, you don't know that, Bernie. You don't know that, Bernie. Bernie, like a boss, says, yes, I do know that because I wrote the damn bill. And he proceeds to explain how his Medicare for All plan is more comprehensive and has better benefits than any health insurance plan in the country and at a lower cost. Then he finishes by saying he's going to give these union workers a raise on top of providing them even better health care. At this point, Tim Ryan finds himself in the same position he was on that first debate night when Tulsi Gabbard embarrassed his ass. The crowd is raucous, and once again, it's at Tim Ryan's expense. The man is reeling, flustered, and you can see it. He looks like a deer in headlights. You can tell he didn't want to get in the mix with Bernie again, but Jake Tapper pulls him right back in. So he's forced to respond to Bernie's tongue lashing. And the best he's got is a bizarre response telling Bernie he doesn't know all the union contracts, basically implying that somewhere out in the world of for-profit private health insurance, there's a plan union workers have that can match the benefits of Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All, and it costs less. After that, he makes this incoherent point about how these workers' wages are stagnant and they have lost their jobs, they've lost everything. And Bernie Sanders is going to come in and take the only thing they have left, their precious private for-profit health insurance plans. Quick point before I break all that down. If you have to resort to silly, childish tactics like pretending the only way to know that Medicare for All is better than every union insurance plan is if Bernie Sanders himself sits there and reads every single union contract, you've already lost. I loved every second of that. I loved every second of that answer from Bernie because he hit all the points that he needed to and managed to sun Tim Ryan all within the given time frame. Now, Bernie gave his best possible answer he could on stage, but there's no way he was going to be able to break down just how silly and cheap that line of attack and questioning was in the first place with less than a minute. So let me do that right now. Before I go into the details of what Tim Ryan said, let's talk about how shameless and disingenuous the framing of this whole exchange was. He's not only trying to portray himself as the defender and spokesman of workers, he pretends like Bernie is anti-worker, anti-union, and Medicare for All is a tool to rip health insurance away from union workers who fought so hard to get it. You want to talk about ass backwards. What Tim Ryan was insinuating and flat out saying was the exact opposite of what reality is. There's no other way to interpret that as anything but a lie and an intentional smear. Bernie is the most pro-worker, pro-union politician in the country. He's the one who's opposed all these outsourcing deals like NAFTA and TPP that have shipped thousands of factory jobs to low-wage countries. Bernie has been out there advocating for a living wage before it was popular. He's the one who got Disney and Amazon to raise their slave wages to $15 an hour. On a regular basis, Bernie is out there marching with teachers' unions and fast food workers better compensation. Bernie's been trying to get maternity and paternity leave and mandatory paid vacation for every worker in this country for decades. I did a video weeks ago about Bernie endorsing unions in the gaming industry because oftentimes game developers work 100-hour weeks with no additional pay. Who else was talking about that besides Bernie Sanders? All these examples I just gave are fairly recent, but Bernie has spent the better part of 4 decades fighting for workers and unions. For Tim Ryan's sleazy ass to come out on that stage and lie bold-faced trying to portray Bernie as a threat to workers and unions takes an unreal lack of integrity. Now to some of the details. This entire line of attack was incoherent. Medicare for All covers everyone in the country and it provides better health benefits at a lower cost than any insurance plan in the country. That's not up for debate. Tim Ryan is pretending that because union workers had to fight to get insurance from their employers, that means they never want anything better. Fighting to get a health insurance plan in a system where it's private employer-based health insurance or nothing at all doesn't mean you're gonna pass up on an opportunity to cover everyone in the country, yourself included, with better benefits at a lower cost. Here's a simple question. What if those factory workers lose their jobs and their insurance? Or what if they want to leave their jobs but they can't because their family's health insurance is tied to it? Even if you're a factory worker with insurance, those scenarios are always lingering over your head and it's terrifying. Of course, they prefer not to have to worry about losing their health care if any of those things happen. In Tim Ryan's rambling, he said that union workers have lost everything. Their wages are stagnant. Some of them have lost their jobs. Then he says, and this makes sense, he says the only thing that they have left is the insurance plans that they fought for. Make that make sense for me. You just said a lot of these people lost their jobs. How do they still have this magical health insurance that you're defending to the hilt if they lost their jobs? You see, that right there is exactly why Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All is important, and that's why that's the better option. Because if they do lose their jobs, they're not going to lose their health care. So Tim Ryan, after Bernie Sanders already owns his ass, he self-owns his ass with that incoherent response that proves why we need Medicare for All. There's one more thing I want to touch on, and that's this incredibly shallow point that people keep bringing up in these Medicare for All conversations. The idea that by supporting Medicare for All, you want to kick millions of people off their private health insurance. That's dangerous and incredibly misleading. This was actually the first question of the night from Jake Tapper, to no one's surprise, and it was directed at Bernie. For the 1,000th time, Jake Tapper asked Bernie if he's going to kick millions of people off their health insurance. That's such a weird right-wing way to frame giving everyone in the country healthcare that's completely free at the point of service and covers every aspect of a person's healthcare. It's insinuating that in order to do Medicare for All, there's going to be a period where no one has any insurance or coverage at all. First of all, I know Bernie has had this conversation with Jake Tapper at least 5 times. And Bernie's asked the same question at every debate and town hall he does. And the answer is exactly the same every time. Now let's put aside all the times Bernie has answered the same question. I don't get how anyone can look at a plan that provides healthcare to everyone, including the 90 million uninsured and underinsured people in the country, while getting rid of out-of-pocket costs and taking the number of people who die every single year from not being able to afford basic health care from 40,000 people. 40,000 people in this country die every year because they can't afford basic health care. Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All takes that number from 40,000 to 0. And your main takeaway is that millions of people aren't going to have their for-profit, employer-based private health insurance plan anymore. That's such a bizarre way to interpret that. It's getting to the point where I'm starting to think that anyone who keeps repeating this is being dense and obtuse on purpose. Especially Jake Tapper, because I know he knows that this has been asked and answered a million times, even without it having to be asked and answered. If you look at the bill, it's very clear there is no period where people don't have health insurance, where they don't have coverage. If Medicare for All passes into law, people automatically get an upgrade to their healthcare plans. What is so bad about that? Why are you trying to frame it as people losing their insurance? It's because Jake Tapper and the rest of mainstream media has that establishment bias. The status quo is just fine. The private health insurance system we have is just fine, even though it's atrocious. And like Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk said a couple weeks ago on a video, and I love this point because he perfectly summarized what's wrong with mainstream media. He said they're adversarial in defense of the status quo. So Medicare for All is radical and revolutionary, and it threatens the status quo. So the framing of all their questions is aggressive against Medicare for All. It's never aggressive against the status quo, which would manifest like by asking candidates, how can you defend the private health insurance system when it's atrocious? Right now, 30 million people have no health insurance. 40,000 people die every year because they can't afford basic health care. How can you defend that? That would be being a journalist. That would be being adversarial to power, to establish power and the status quo, which is what journalists are supposed to do. But like Kyle says, what the mainstream media does, what Jake Tapper is doing right here, is being adversarial in defense of the status quo. So this was obviously a prepackaged line of attack from Tim Ryan, but it was still incredibly incoherent and nonsensical. Sure, it's possible that Tim Ryan fucked up the delivery, but like I explained when I dismantled the framing, it was stupid from the jump because it requires you to act like the most pro-worker, pro-union politician, arguably in modern history, is somehow trying to screw over workers by providing them with a Medicare for All. Tim Ryan needs to fire whoever came up with that strategy. Better yet, he should fire his whole goddamn campaign staff and drop out because he has nothing to add to the conversation. He's taking up space, and there's zero chance of him going any further than he is right now. And by the way, where he is right now is being the laughing stock in every debate that he's in.